So, my name's Ben Maddox, and my show is Five Games for Doomsday.
Hey, I'm Mike. Welcome to Podcast Diaries. These are the stories of podcasters who feel alone, just like you. Ben, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Well, it's so I live in Germany, and they call this time zwischen den Jahren, which is a brilliant term. It means between the years. So
Oh,
it's that time between Christmas and New Year. And
yeah.
so I always love it because, being a congenitally lazy person, this gives me the opportunity to do nothing. So it's wonderful.
So during that week, is everything just kind of like shut down?
Well, so it's the 27th when we're recording this,
Okay.
and yeah, kind of businesses. So if you wanted to get in contact with a haulage company or something, you're
Sure.
probably not going to have much luck. But supermarkets and restaurants opened today. So you go to the supermarkets. The 26th, everything's closed. 25th, everything's closed.
Uh-huh.
So you go in on the 27th, and it's basically the German equivalent of Black Friday, essentially,
Gotcha.
because people need their pumpernickel.
They do. So your thick German accent is really coming
That's right.
through.
That's right.
So tell me where you're originally from, Ben.
So I'm from the classic German town of Tenbury Wells in Worcestershire, England.
Okay.
So I'm from the middle of nowhere in England originally,
Yeah.
and it's I was back there. I was back there about a month ago actually, and it's beautiful. It's really chocolate box country.
Mm.
But if you don't like sheep or alcoholics, it's not the place for you. Basically.
What if I combine the two and I like alcoholic sheep?
Well, then get there, because it is your place. Also, the town I come from is only a population of 3,000.
Oh wow. Yeah.
But it is, strangely, the mistletoe capital of Britain.
The mistletoe capital
The
of Britain.
mistletoe capital of Britain. There's a mistletoe market there every year that is the biggest mistletoe market in the country
Well, sure it is.
for some reason.
Why wouldn't it be the biggest mistletoe market in the country? Wait, are there other mistletoe markets in the country?
Well, this might be it.
Okay.
It might be, 2 stalls, 3 clumps of mistletoe, but there are no more
They're
mistletoe.
the biggest. Yeah.
Exactly.
So tell me what do you do in real life? What do you do in the actual world, if you're willing to share that?
As little as possible.
Okay.
But so my training, my profession is I'm an actor.
Oh.
And I split my time at the moment. I have, even though I'm far too old for that, I have this sort of millennial patchwork profession thing. So I'm partly professionally podcaster,
Okay.
Voiceover artist, actor on the stage,
Sure.
and teacher. And at the moment, I'm currently actually, fascinatingly enough, a podcast consultant. I'm teaching someone how to launch a podcast at the moment.
Wow. Well, good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you. What can I ask what the podcast is about?
What they're doing,
Yeah.
it's a science podcast,
Okay.
which is great because I'm completely science illiterate. But what I do know is how to navigate editing shows. I know how to navigate, and I think this is the thing, that he wants the podcast to be good, essentially. And I think the big problem
How dare
people
he.
face, well, I know the big problem people face when they first start a show, I think, is they think it's just a matter of turning on microphones
Yeah.
and speaking into them, and that kind of effortlessness is actually born out of a lot of work and a lot of effort, and being on. I'm an actor, so I've been an actor for 25 years.
Mhm.
So, and my demeanor in front of a microphone is completely different to my demeanor, when I'm just sat around speaking to friends, and people kind of don't understand that. They think that turn on the mic, talk like you talk,
Right.
and it's going to be amazing.
Right.
And I think my sort of skill in this venture that I'm doing, it's the first time I've done it, actually. I was approached by him for it, and he got some funding for it, is that I understand sort of the logistics, how to get a podcast up and all of that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
But also, I think I'm quite good at teaching people how to address a microphone and
Mm.
how to speak into a microphone to make yourself sound interesting, because
Mhm.
it's fatal. You listen to so many shows, I think, especially within the board gaming one.
Yeah.
You listen to so many shows and you think, oh my life, that's
Yeah.
and what's interesting is those board game shows, actually, if you go back 6 8 months later, maybe a year later, they're vastly improved,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
because it's something you can learn. And my goal, being a podcast consultant, I guess, is to try and reduce that time from being boring to being interesting as
Mhm.
much as possible, I
Mhm.
suppose.
That's a tough thing to teach. To be able to get people to basically evolve more
Yeah,
quickly.
it's fascinating, actually, because being an actor and having gone through acting training, there are technical things you can do. There are simply things you can do with the way you manipulate your face and the way you manipulate the resonance of your voice to just make yourself sound more interesting. And these are things everyone can do, because it's just a matter of doing certain things while you talk. Of
Certainly.
course, that's not the whole thing of it, but so much to do with the sound of the voice is to do with where you position the voice in your body, the way you're using the bones, especially in your skull, to resonate the way your voice sounds. And you can make your voice sound bright, and you can make your voice sound dark. And
Mhm.
these are techniques that everyone can learn, essentially.
Right.
And then, you know, and the beautiful thing about a podcast, as opposed to presenting something or acting, is that it is chatting, and
Mhm.
everyone knows
Mhm.
how to do that. So if you can just tweak people's sort of natural abilities, I think this is why podcasts are so popular, right? Is because it feels like that you're sat in a room with people listening to them having a chat, as opposed to a presented, produced show.
Right.
And there is, I mean, I'm sure part of the attraction of podcasts is people listen to it and think, God, I could do that.
Yeah.
And I think there's a bit more to it.
There's a little bit of that. They put themselves in that seat. It's why I'm a big fan of audio, though, as well.
Right.
We do a lot of video stuff here as well, but I think it's a bit lazy sometimes to just turn on a camera rather than to try to get my point across in audio, or to be able to use sounds and music and things like that to elicit feelings and stories in people's
Right.
brains. I am a big fan of that. It's why people love reading. It's why people love anything like that. It's
Well,
much easier
well,
to watch a movie than read a book.
it's that big thing, right? I think certain art forms are very prescriptive and certain art forms aren't.
Mm-hmm.
It's the difference between a movie and a novel, right? The
Right.
reason so many people, I think, are so disappointed by movie adaptations of novels is not necessarily because they've done a bad job of adapting the novel. It's just you watch it and go, no, John doesn't look like
That's
that,
right. That's right.
because you've built. So the beautiful thing about the written word is the written word, the book itself is the scaffolding. You put all of the flesh on the bones. You give the colors and the smells and the looks and the sounds of all of these characters. And yeah, I think the audio. I grew up listening to a lot of radio
Mm-hmm.
drama,
Mm-hmm.
and it can. I guess I wouldn't say it's better or worse, but what it does do is give you an ownership over the experience of that more than other things do.
Yeah.
If you watch a movie, you know how it sounds,
Yeah.
you know how
Yeah.
they look.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you listen to a radio play, you know how they sound.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of get a feeling of where they are,
Mm-hmm.
but the way a building looks, the way the character looks, what they're wearing is your invention, I
I
think. And
would
I think
I
that's a
would
wonderful
I
thing.
would much rather watch a horror movie that keeps the creature away from me for an extended period of time, so that I'm able to make this grotesque thing in my head that no one else thinks.
Sure, sure.
I know what the monster looks like because it's in my brain, but until it shows up on the screen, that's a whole different thing. So
The Shining is scary
yes.
because it is creeping insanity
Yes.
that's invisible. That's why The
Right.
Shining scary. I watched a horror movie recently, which was it's absolutely horrendous. I watched Terrifier 2,
Mm,
which is very gory. I mean,
yeah.
gory to the
That's all it
point of
is. Yeah.
absurdity.
Yeah.
But it's really dull. It's just
Mm-hmm.
really dull. There are no
Mm-hmm.
characters, there's no story, there's no
Mm-hmm.
tension. There's just boring, 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 blood, boring, boring.
Yeah.
And the greatest horror films certainly are where the creature is in the corner of the room. I think one of the most arresting scenes in horror in the canon of horror is the last shot of the Blair Witch Project where she runs down into the cellar and you see the guy standing in the corner. That's horrific. It's
I
horrific.
gotta tell you, Ben, I saw that in a theater. So I'm 1,000 years old, but I saw it in a theater where
And me too.
I don't know if they actually timed it this way, if this was instructions by the company that was distributing the film, or if it was just some smart projectionist. But as soon as that last scene hits, boom, the lights came up, and it
Wow.
scared the crud out of me for about a week. And I was an adult.
Right.
It scared the crud out of me, and you
Yeah.
never saw the witch. That was what really, really got you.
And the beauty of the human brain is no one. I mean, I mean, especially if you get into middle age, no one can be as neurotic and
That's
paranoid
true.
and fear-inducing as your own brain. And
Yes.
that's what great writers of horror, great creators of horror understand, right?
So Ben, tell me about your show. What is it? Where'd it come from?
So the show, I shamelessly stole the format off BBC Radio 4.
Mm.
So the show is I interview board game personalities. These may be designers, these may be content creators, artists, people who are interesting people who have an interest in board gaming, for instance.
Yeah.
I interviewed Craig Silverstein, who is employee number one at Google.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a board gamer, but his story is not really attached to board games. It's attached to writing papers with Sergey Brin and being the first person Google ever employed,
Sure.
And so the premise is essentially there's been an unknown apocalypse. You've had to flee to a cabin in the woods, and you can only take 5 of your games with you. Which games do you take, and what does that say about who you are as a person? And so essentially, I go through people's biographies and I ask them about their lives. And some people are, intimately involved with gaming.
Right.
And so the conversation is very much about gaming. Some people aren't,
Mm-hmm.
and you talk about their lives outside of that. And I always try to have a section in the show in which I talk about a general topic, whether that be a gaming topic or whether that's something, something related to them. So the last show that aired was a guy who's a critic for Empire magazine, which is a film magazine.
Yeah.
And he's been a critic for 20 years. And so a part of the interview was talking about the role of the critic, why a critic's important, why aren't critics the parasites that a lot of people paint them as, And so that's the idea. And I guess, so this is going to sound very highfalutin, but when I started the show, I sort of thought about the early days of literature, especially novels. And, wouldn't it be wonderful to have an interview with Cervantes? Wouldn't it be wonderful to have an interview with Lawrence Stern?
Yeah.
And, you're never going to get to hear those because of the time and the technical limitations and everything. And I feel like within board games, we're in that beginning phase where the art form is really being formed, where you have true, genuine trailblazers who are breaking open the form, with every game they publish.
Yeah.
And I consider my role to have a record of who they are, what they do, and why they do it.
We have an owner here that is involved in escape rooms. And so I'm able to talk about those a lot with him and his partner that's in another part of the country. It fascinates me how they're able to come up with these puzzles that people actually want to go
Yeah,
play, which basically they're real life board games. You know,
right.
you let somebody in a room for an hour or whatever. So where does this fascination with games come from?
So so it's it came from encroaching age, essentially.
Okay.
Um, so I enjoyed my 20s.
Hmm.
It's safe to say.
Mm.
And then I was in my 30s and I realized the kind of things I did to enjoy my 20s are just not feasible
Mm.
when your knees start to creak
Sure. Sure.
and your back starts to ache and
Sure.
and you feel the effects of intoxicants the next day
Mm.
10 times more than you did a decade before. So I kind of wanted to do something and I was moving to a city, so I was moving to Berlin. And I wanted to do something that would get me in a room with people, that would allow me to meet people, develop a new network, but didn't involve sitting in the pub every night.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, and I just sort of fell into a YouTube wormhole. I watched the Dice Tower, which is a big, board game
Yeah, sure.
YouTube channel. And, I sort of fell into it harder than I could have ever expected. And then I guess, yeah. And so I got really sort of entranced by the whole thing, I find out when I started playing them that they were essentially very, very different from what I'd assumed in the
Mm.
past, and incredibly innovative, and they were able to elicit kind of reactions and responses in the players that were incredibly surprising. And as soon as that became a thing, I realized I wanted to talk about them
Yeah.
and in some way to try and sort of relate my experiences to other people, I guess.
Have you been able to do, and this is a selfish question on my part, is it, we started as a board game, card game company.
Right.
We made board games, not successful. We made card games, not successful. But we did make a lot of them. So I guess there's something
Right.
there. Um, but the thing that you quickly learn when you decide, hey, I'm going to make a game, is how valuable playtesting is,
Right.
and amongst very different groups you need. You don't necessarily need, from day one, you don't necessarily need the people that play games all the time.
Right.
You need people from the outside world that go, this is stupid, and walk away, because you're never going to get an intriguing game if you can't appeal to a large audience. Unfortunately, it's not as niche as something like podcasting.
Right.
It does have to be a little more inclusive. Your audience size does matter when you're trying to sell something at retail. So, have you been able to do any play testing and things like that? Have you gotten in any of those groups?
Sure, I know a lot of designers because my show is based on talking to
Sure.
designers, and
Right.
I get the feeling as well because I want to talk to designers about their whole
Mm-hmm.
life rather
Mm-hmm.
than just the game they're releasing now, the Kickstarter that's coming up.
Yeah. Yeah.
They seem very receptive to talking to me about stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
and so I ended up sort of getting very much into the community and I don't design games myself. It's
Sure.
completely out of my mental capacity. But I see the process a lot. And I think what's interesting about the play test process is firstly knowing who your game is for.
Mm.
And then secondly, I think it's a kind of drop a stone in a pool ripple process in that you start with yourself, then you go to people who know you, that you rely on. And as the game gets closer and closer towards publishing, you go out to further and further circles, people who are maybe outside of the initial demographic that you see it for. Because I think if you can get it to work with people who don't know you, who have
Mm.
no
Mm-hmm.
interest in whether you're happy with their feelings on your game or whatever, then that becomes valuable. Matt Leacock, the designer of Pandemic, is fascinating. His process
Mm.
is so often the process with playtesting is that you'll playtest the game and the designer will give you a feedback sheet.
Right.
Matt Leacock doesn't bother with the feedback sheets. He will he will give the game to the group, and then he'll just sit and watch them play it.
Yeah.
And where people react with joy, he'll note that down. Where people look bored, he'll note that down. And he's very much about looking at the reactions of the people, rather, because I mean, and I tend to agree with him, because I think people want to sound cleverer than they are, and
Yeah,
they
they
want
do.
to massage their experience to make them look better than they
Well,
are, right? So
I'm just
so
sitting
it's
here.
not dishonesty necessarily, it's just a massage of the truth.
Yeah.
Whereas I think when you see the raw reaction of someone, you can judge that yourself.
I'm sitting here listening to you about that process, and I'm like, well, heck yeah, that's the way I would do it. I would
Right.
want to see people's faces. You know, I would want to see their body language. I would want to see, or I'd want to hear the inflection in their voice instead of just being written on a page somewhere to tell me what's wrong with my game, because chances are they're not going to tell me the real reason.
Sure. And also, I think if you're playtesting with gamers, every gamer kind of has an aspiration to be a designer at the same time. And so they might not tell you what's wrong with your game. They might tell you what they would do if they were designing that game, which I mean, it might be useful, but I don't think that's the purpose of playtesting, because you're designing your game. You're not designing someone else's.
Yeah, good luck selling to that one guy.
Right. You know? Exactly.
So tell me where the motivation comes for the show. The show in particular.
So originally, I had a previous project which had its issues, and I wanted, because I often don't play well with others, I wanted to do a project that I was in total control of. That I wouldn't run into the kind of roadblocks you do when you have to work in a team, right? And I had a sort of fixed idea of what I wanted to do, and that enabled me to have, because I think a one-person podcast is an incredibly difficult thing to pull off, because it's not why people listen to them, I don't think. But having rotating guests on means that they don't really have a stake in the editing, how the show sounds, what the trailer is for the show, things like language and stuff like this. You know, I'm very keen on people being able to say exactly what they want to say. So I've always been very much sort of, you know, you can use 4-letter words if you wish. And I know that's an issue for people. And I mean, the motivation, and it's one of those things, the creative process is really difficult, because it's just a vicious circle of, you know, enthusiasm and despair in many ways. And so I've been doing the podcast for nearly 5 years now. And I have times where I think, what am I doing? And I have times where I think this is the only sort of, the only consistent pillar in my life, you know. But I mean, what does it for me? I think the real motivation that does now, sort of 5 years on, is firstly, when you look at that huge back catalogue of stuff you've done, it's really quite comforting to think that you've, you know, because the podcast has led me into many other areas, into writing for a living, which is something I've always wanted to do but never quite felt I had the confidence to do it in it. Writing for the podcast built up my confidence enough to apply to places and pitch them ideas that subsequently got picked up, you know. And so, yeah, and it's become a really healthy habit for me doing the podcast.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer, though.
Yeah, and I find having an episode download on my podcatcher a really satisfying thing. This month we're recording in December, and me and a friend of mine for the show did an advent calendar, which meant daily episodes up until Christmas Day, and that was really great. And I think people really liked it, and you know, it helped with downloads, and I made more money and all of that sort of stuff. And I also, I'm not going to lie, I mean, part of the motivation is money. Yeah, you know. I've always considered the show a professional venture, even when it wasn't yielding any money, and now it's yielding some money. I mean, not enough to live on, but it's yielding some money. And so part of that is keeping up with the content, making sure the content's good, and the bit I'm really bad at, which is sort of interacting with the community.
It is, there's something wholly satisfying when you see that someone else is enjoying what you do.
Right.
And in this world, someone giving you $1 for doing a thing is
Absolutely.
approval of, that thing. And so I completely understand where you're coming from, but I love the fact that your first motivation is it's a healthy habit.
Sure.
It's something
Absolutely.
that keeps you regulated. It's something that keeps you on task, on balance, all of that. And
Having,
I can see that.
yeah, having deadlines is really healthy, I think. And knowing I have to upload a podcast on these days and I have to have that done
Yeah.
gets you out of bed even when you kind of don't want to, And I think that's a very valuable thing.
Yeah, even self-induced deadlines, which are the easiest
Yeah.
ones to break. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one thing I learned in my drama school training was be on time. And so I'm on time with uploading my shows all the time, and I think that's vital.
It is.
If you want a successful show.
It's one of the things we teach here at the network is consistency. Consistency, and you can outlast most of them if you're just consistent.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think we've already kind of talked about this, and I'm gonna let you go after this question. But what does success as a podcaster look like to you?
So it's not something I've achieved just yet.
Okay.
Although I'm very satisfied with the show and I'm very satisfied with what people think. Mm-hmm. Success as a podcaster for me is supporting myself doing this. That's the bottom line. Yeah. That's why I continue to innovate. That's why I continue to do different things, because that's the goal. Yeah. Because working's horrendous, and if you can get out of having a job, that's the goal.
Yeah.
And so that's what success looks like as a destination.
Gotcha.
As a journey, it is getting feedback, people telling you they like what you do, having the respect of your peers. It sounds incredibly vain, but I think it's absolutely vital. The people who you respect you too. And lots of little steps along the way. And if anyone's listening to this thinking about doing a podcast, or they're doing a podcast in its embryonic phases and they're not getting what they want, you will have moments. You'll have days that are just brilliant. For whatever that means to you, you'll get an email, you'll get a job offer, something will happen. Mm-hmm. You'll make a new friend, as soppy as that sounds. You will have days where you'll go, wow, that was amazing. Then you'll have gaps where you won't hear anything, and just remember the small victories because they're worth it, I guess.
That's wonderful. Ben, it has been a pleasure getting to know you over these few minutes. I've really enjoyed listening to how you got here, and I will certainly be on the sidelines rooting for you from here on in. Can you just kind of one more time give us the full name and the name of your show so that they can go find it?
Sure. This is what I say whenever I do these things. So it's 5 Games for Doomsday. That's 5gamesfordoomsday.com. And also, the Patreon is patreon.com/5G4D. Frankly, to back the Patreon, there's no requirement to listen to the show. So, if you want to just give me $100 for no reason because you like the sound of my voice, wow, I'm good with that.
That is big of you. I appreciate you including everyone. That's
absolutely. Very inclusive.
Really great. Well, Ben, thank you so much again, and we really appreciate it. We'll be listening.
Wonderful. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Check out more Podcast Diaries and plenty of other shows at roguemedianetwork.com. If you have a story to tell, reach out to us. info@roguemedianetwork.com. This has been a Rogue Media Network production.